Tonight, right off, we have a live caller. Love those. By the way, you want to be a live caller, email me and we'll see what happens. So, Jennifer, you can hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. You said you emailed me that you have a perspective on how your eating too much relates to your need to be right. So, go for it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm always trying to be right, and when I'm doing that, I do a lot of talking. And I'm wondering if this need to chew and eat is related to this, a supplement, I guess you could say, when I'm not having an opportunity to be right and talk and try to be right.
So, they're not so much related to each other as they are to the same thing. So, you talk and need to be right because you're in pain. It's that simple.
Yeah.
And you eat and chew because you're in pain. So we use whatever pain reliever we've got. Anything will do. Food, being right, gambling, excitement, accomplishment, sex, praise, pick a thing. And if we've got plenty of one, then we don't notice that we wouldn't need to diminish our pain with the others. And so it's really common for people to go from one addiction, they become sober, which is really a misnomer. That means they just quit using that addiction. Then they go to another one.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of people in AA, for example, quit drinking alcohol and they go immediately to prescription drugs. Well, it's not sober. In your case, you just use whichever one is convenient at the time. So if you're by yourself and there's nobody to be right with, you would tend to eat. That makes sense? Whereas if you've got somebody around you can be right with, well, you would probably not eat, because if you ate, then that would interfere with your ability to be right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's all about pain and our cumulative ability to diminish it.
Yeah. I suppose I figured, as much as I've done over this past year, that it would be way less than it is now.
What would?
The pain and not having that need to continue either, eating so much or being right or whatever.
So people tend to go in quantum jumps rather than a smooth course up the mountain. How many people do I know who've been in real love for months, years, and then realize that they're doing some particular thing exactly the same? So it took months or years for them to diminish their pain for real, to feel loved, and then when they get pain-free enough, they see other things that they're doing. So part of what you're describing is that, but the other part is, after we've treated pain long enough, it becomes just flat, a habit. And sometimes now we can use these old pain relievers even when we're not in pain. And that makes us crazy, because we're going, well, but I'm not in pain, why am I doing this? So, for example, I discovered that I had a habit of, when I would sit in front of the television and be answering emails and so on, sitting in front of the television makes me hungry. No, actually it doesn't. It's an old habit. So I have to pay attention to that so that I can break the habit, even though I don't really have the need.
Okay, I got it.
A lot of people interrupt with but and being right because they've always done it. They may actually be feeling loved in the moment. It takes a while for the pain relief to kick in, feeling loved, being loving, and then sometimes just elimination of old habits.
Okay.
I'll still see somebody's prescription narcotics on their bedstand or whatever. It was several years ago. I went to see a friend because his wife called me, and he had died. And the first person she called was me. And so I went over there to see this guy, and he's lying in his bed. He's dead. And I talked with the family for a while. It was a really very touching experience. And on my way out, I see a lineup of prescription narcotics and on his dresser, And the first thing that occurs to me is, I would like to have those.
Mm-hmm.
It was a habit. I wasn't in pain of any kind. It had been a wonderful experience. I felt loved and loving. I see the narcotics, and the first thing I can think of is, I want some. Ridiculous. See the point?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
got it. Okay. Yeah.
So thanks for that, honey. That was excellent.
All right. Cool. Thanks.
Appreciate you. Here's a member who says, I was rewatching your recent Tuesday evening videos, and it seems to me that you've been emphasizing the expression of our feelings a lot as of late. Is this a new development, or has it been there all along and I somehow missed it? Oh, I don't know. I can barely remember what I did yesterday, so noticing patterns, couldn't tell you, but probably. Because I evolve through this just like everybody else does, and learn all the time. So I've been learning more about feelings than I knew before, so it's pretty likely that I'd be talking about them more. A lot of it has to do with my experience with people. So my approach tends to modify as I see what works and what works better. You said, would you be willing to talk about this a bit more on the Tuesday evening video? For someone who has always lived in her head, speaking of yourself, and whose feelings were never nurtured as a child, and typically has no idea how she's feeling, again, still speaking about yourself, this latest development is a real struggle and a stretch for me. Well, good for you. So in at least a couple of the books, I've talked about event, judgment, feeling, reaction. So things happen, we make a judgment. After we've made the judgment, we have an automatic feeling, and then we react. That's a really nice intellectual picture of why we behave as we behave. The problem with it is that, with few exceptions, the judgments that we're responding to, that we're having our feelings about, are judgments that were given to us 20, 30, 40 years ago. So we have a very hard time identifying what our current judgment is, not attached to the past. It's buried, in fact. We just go straight to the feeling. Now there's a judgment there, but we do. So it's important to talk about the feelings. Good to know the intellectual underpinnings of our feelings and behaviors, but until we change our feelings, we're screwed. No kidding. Because our behaviors are pretty much determined by how we feel. The cutting edge of learning theory now teaches us that, whereas before we've thought that we're intellectual beings and we gather information and we make decisions, no, not really. More complicated decisions, we simply have a feeling. We just have a gut feeling. Then we simply make a choice. In other words, we react. And then we use our brains to justify the choice that we made. In other words, to justify the feelings that we had in the first place that we're not identifying. Every day I talk to people all day long, and on the whole, they're acting out of how they feel. Once we get afraid, for example, our brains shut down. That's been actually demonstrated by functional MRIs. We just quit thinking. Fear just takes over everything. We become completely irrational. Now, some people stay rational, but those people move up into their heads and just stay there. They live there. You have a tendency to do that. I know the person who wrote this, and so I'm speaking to her like she's sitting right here. Whereas otherwise I'd be speaking like she was sitting behind me. No. But I know her, so I can speak with some authority about what she does. People who live in their heads, understanding doesn't change them, because what it does is it makes a change in a virtual world, in effect. It's like changing a setting on a video game. It's just a thing, it's just a concept. So many people in real love over the years that I've identified can recite the books, in some cases better than I can, but they don't really change. They're not happy because their feelings didn't change. Now, ideally, if you change judgments, then feelings would follow. But it turns out that just changing our judgments isn't enough. This is why real love is simultaneously the most effective power on earth for healing wounds and changing lives, but it's also the most difficult to adopt. How many people have talked to me and said, I don't understand why this isn't everywhere? Why isn't this on all the talk shows? Why isn't this in the newspaper? Why is it? Because it's difficult. Actually changing how we feel is probably the greatest miracle I know of. We've learned to live with our feelings for a lifetime. We're used to them. We think they're normal. Mostly, we don't even recognize that we're having them. I talked to a woman earlier today, and she told me her story for a little bit, and I said, honey, you're lonely and miserable. And she said, well, I am alone, but I'm not miserable. So she has no connections to any other human beings, but she actually believes she's not miserable. Why? Because she has felt like this since she was a baby. So she doesn't call it miserable. She calls it normal. So she's used to this feeling and now no longer identifies miserable. She only identifies miserable if her level of misery goes up 3 to 4-fold. So we're in a prison of our feelings, which in turn were caused by judgments. But we don't realize that. We're not conscious of that. If a child isn't taught to feel loved early, it is virtually impossible to gain that feeling for that child without a significant event or person to intervene and teach that feeling. A woman that I saw recently, over the weekend, in fact, she's been studying real love for months, been to many meetings, participated in conference calls, read the books, on and on and on and on. And when I spent time with her, the look on her face was terror. I spent some time with her. I held her. Her body quivered like a Boston Terrier. For those of you who haven't had a Boston Terrier, like she was having mini seizures. Terrified. It took the longest time for her to quit quivering and for her face to change from a mask of horror to somewhat relaxed. I pointed out that she had made the transition to somewhat relaxed, and she said, this is the first time I've ever felt like this. So she's heard all the event, judgment, intellectual stuff, and still hadn't changed her feeling. That is why I personally do real love, is to make that possible for people, to get to the feeling. I explain things to people every day, but more and more, and this is probably what you've noticed, I see that it doesn't make much difference for most people. Now, it's good to have an understanding. That's why I wrote the books, so that we could get the objections out of the way and at least all be on the same page. That's good. But books don't change feelings very well. Every once in a blue moon, somebody will write and say, I read the book, changed my whole life, thank you. Hate those people. I couldn't do it that easily. So it's possible, but rarely is it enough. So how do you change feelings? You have to be loved and trust. As we love people, it gives them a chance to trust and feel. So books are okay. Conference calls, that's one level. Seminars, there's often a fair bit of loving going on at seminars, but many people can detach from a seminar and not really feel it. And in fact, to be direct, forgive me, shoot me in the head, I've watched you at seminars, and you detach. It took you a long time even to sit next to somebody and feel comfortable physically close to them. Now you're doing that, but you still detach. Recently I've been doing real love weekends. Very powerful, way better than I had ever thought possible, because there's lots of personal interaction. If somebody's in their head, I stop them right now. For many people, that's not enough either. The weekend just warms them up to what many people require in order to feel loved, and that's to get an intervention. I don't ever recommend an intervention to somebody who doesn't need it. It's not like I need something to do, but the interventions are all about the feelings and more feelings. Um, Somebody once asked me what percentage of people who come to interventions are significantly different afterward. And I thought, I don't know, 50%, I was guessing, which would be very high because by the time most people come here, they've been through, in some cases, literally dozens of therapists and support groups and on and on and on. So if all those things have failed, one would imagine that the chances of success, this would be difficult to study, it would require a meta study, in fact, but probably less than 5%, just statistically speaking. So I thought 50% was a lot better than 5%. But I looked it up for the last 2 or 3 years. Roughly 80% of people who come here are significantly different, which is the only reason I recommend it, is because nothing else has worked. In fact, in all the years that I've been doing interventions, all of them, I've only ever written somebody and suggested that they have an intervention because they weren't accessing their feelings without their asking me what their next step was. The only time I've ever just intruded in all these years was you. Years ago, it was obvious that these feelings were just never introduced to you. So how could you identify them? People who've never ever tasted a fruit, how would they know what a fruit tasted like? Strawberry, raspberry, apples, whatever. They couldn't, so they'd have to eat one. So would you. Not obligating you to do spit. I never followed up on my email suggestion to you. But you might need that. Don't know. But that's a longer answer to your question than you probably were looking for. Here's a member who says, my husband and I have been doing real love for quite a while. We're much happier than we've ever been, but he tells me that when our adult daughter is around, I ignore him, and he doesn't feel loved. Well, I don't think I'm ignoring him, and we can't come to an agreement about it. What should I do? Let's stick with principles. You could argue whether you are or are not ignoring him forever, and you would not come to a conclusion. Arguing is really just controlling. I want to control your opinion. And it almost never does any good to talk about what we don't like without realizing it. When we tell people what we don't like, again, we're controlling. So what's the solution? Talk about what's true and about what you want and what's possible. Look at those 3 things. Talk about what's true. Truth is always a good thing to start with. Talk about what you want. That's not controlling, unless, of course, you're insisting and demanding. And what's possible. Again, that's what's true. So what's true here? If he were sitting in front of me, I would say to him. So we're going to separate this. It rarely does any good to speak to 2 people at the same time because they have different needs. So to him, she simply cannot spend time simultaneously with both you and your daughter. And somehow you actually expect that. I know you enjoy her attention, but you have an unreasonable expectation that she will somehow be able to fully attend to your daughter, but also attend to you. You'd like both effects to happen. You want your daughter to feel loved, but you don't want to give up any of the time or attention. Impossible. You don't realize you have this expectation, but you do. Now, how do I know? When we're unhappy, there's almost always an unfulfilled expectation lurking in there somewhere, and you're not happy about your daughter coming over because it detracts from your wife's attention for you. Let's use Donna and myself as an example. When the grandkids come over, and this is the first time I can ever remember knowing that my grandchildren are actually watching one of these. When my grandkids come over, I spend a lot of time with them. I pay a lot of attention to them. I enjoy it. So does she. When I'm playing with them, it's a full-time job. You can't pay part-time attention to a 3-year-old. Good luck with that. You pretty much have to kick them out of the room or they suck your soul out of your head. So I can't be paying equal attention to her while I'm paying attention to them. That's just the truth. Or I can't pay full attention to her when I'm talking to other people, as in right now. Right now, I'm talking to you. There's no way that I can be having a conversation with her at the same time. Now, notice that when I'm talking to him, this is to those who are watching the video chat, I was talking to him up to this point, I don't address whether she is ignoring him. No, she might be, she might not, don't care. I'm talking to him. I'm talking about what he can see or do. The truth? Not having enough faith. And we all do this. When the sun goes down, we, emotionally speaking, believe that's the end of the world. The sun will never come back. Well, the truth is, it will come back. But we like an ongoing proof of love. It doesn't work, and it's really tiresome for us and for those that we expect it from. I know that if Donna's out playing with the grandkids and doing something or preparing for their coming or whatever, I'm going to get to see her again, so I don't worry about it. So when she's playing with the kids, I don't worry about her getting attention from her. When I'm playing with the kids, she doesn't worry about me. Now, when we get together, we go out of our way to look right at each other and pay attention to each other. We'll get to that in a minute. Now, back to him again. If you want attention, remember we talked about what's telling the truth, asking for what you want, and then what's possible. If you want attention, get it. Ask for time. Ask for time to talk, to sit together, to walk together outside, whatever. Ask for it instead of resenting that you're not getting it. So when your daughter's over, if you want time with your wife, you don't sit and hope she'll read your mind. You don't sit and resent the fact that she's not spending time with you. Donna does this with me. I'll be with the grandkids or something else, and she'll come tap me on the shoulder and say, "Have you got a minute?" Which means you really do have a minute. And I go with her, and we do whatever. She just needed a minute to recover. But she asks for it. If I want time, I go and ask her for time. It's a very common problem that people complain about what they don't get instead of identifying what they want. Now, to her, as though she were sitting in front of me, honey, pay attention to him. Don't argue about whether you do or don't ignore him. Waste of time. Just pay attention to him. It's obvious that he needs your love. And it's obvious that he's not getting as much as he wants, and if he's not smart enough to figure that out, I'm not insulting his intelligence, then figure it out for him. Watch his face. It's like a billboard telling you how he's feeling. Ask how he's doing. Ask what he needs. You can't give them both simultaneous full attention, but you can give them alternating attention. Simultaneous is impossible. Alternating is quite feasible. So your daughter is over, you talk to her, you cook dinner with her, whatever, and you stop what you're doing. Donna and I both do this when the grandkids or the kids are over. You stop, you go find him, you touch his face, you kiss his eyelids, you say, "Who do I love most?" Oh, well, he'll be like a little kid or a puppy getting his belly scratched. I love it. I love saying to Donna, "Who loves you most?" Or Donna will say, "Do you need anything?" It doesn't matter whether I need anything. It's the fact that she asked. I mean, one day she just had a look on her face. And I went, "What do you want?" "Well, nothing." "No, you want something." "I don't know. Would you like to spend some time together?" So instead of just going, "Well, she doesn't know what she wants," well then, heck with her. "Would you like to spend some time together?" "Yes." She said, "Yes, but you have 20 calls in a row," which was true. And I said, "I will cancel the next 4. I'll just send him an email, say, psht, we're going to figure it out later, and we'll go wherever." And we did. So simultaneous, but alternating, really not so difficult. Now, to those of you who are watching, almost never helps to complain or to feel neglected. So we need more awareness. We need to be aware of what we need and of what the other person needs. Just aware, not whining and complaining. We need to realize what's true. We need to have faith in what is true, that there is love available to us, that when the sun goes down, it is but briefly obscured. It has not disappeared. And then it really gets a whole lot easier, you know? Somebody wrote me during the week and said, so, where is the Sylvie story? How are you going to explain to your granddaughter that you have neglected her? I forgot the Sylvie story. So this week, Jeanette said, Sylvie's mom, actually I should just call her Sylvie's mom, you know. She said, we came home pretty late from spending time with John's family. That's her husband. The kids had already put on their pajamas and brushed their teeth. It's good thinking. So when we came home, we took them straight to their rooms. We explained to Sylvie, who's 3, well, she was 3 then, now she's 4, that it was too late to do our bedtime routine. They normally read a book, they sing songs, they read out of the Bible, they pray. It's quite a routine. Sylvie was bummed out. She said, but Mom, I want to do the routine. I empathized with her and again explained that it was too late, so we all needed to go to bed. She looked thoughtful and said, maybe when you leave, I can do my own routine. Sheesh, what an example for us adults to follow. There's always a solution with this kid. She doesn't whine and complain and act like a victim. She asks for what she wants. If she doesn't get it, she may ask again. But if she knows she's not going to get it, she comes up with something. I love it. I wish I was that smart now. Here's an email from a member. She says, I'm a home health nurse. I work during the days, and some days I'm on call for emergencies. At the end of June, I submitted a request at work for time off to attend the retreat or the weekend there in Rome in August. A couple of days later, I got an email from my supervisor who said, quote, your time off request was reviewed and it was noticed that you are on call for those days you requested. Before your request can be granted, you will have to call the other nurses to see if they can either trade call or take call for you. End quote. She continues, I responded that I had by email that I had received no on-call schedule. They have a real tendency not to send us the schedule till the last minute. Now they want to put the burden on me for getting someone to cover for all the call days I didn't even know I had, in all caps. I wrote and told them that. And now I'm requesting a meeting to discuss this situation. She didn't say discussing situation, but that's the tone. I cannot see how it is my responsibility to cover an on-call assignment that I had no knowledge of. So, listen slowly. Ideally, it shouldn't be your responsibility to do that. Sounds very much like they are wrong, that they screwed up. But you're paid by these people. So even though it might be grossly unfair, they still get to tell you what to do. This is a hard thing for people to grasp. We are not hired to do a job. No. We're not hired to fill a position. We are hired to do whatever our boss tells us to do. No kidding. So you can bring up that you didn't have the schedule once, but that's it. Obviously, they are irresponsible about sending out the call schedule. You didn't know about it. They expected you would somehow read their minds. That really isn't right. But if you become insistent with them about how you're right, this won't go well. There's a difference between being right and pushing that you're right. Very different. If they acknowledge their mistake in your meeting with them, great. But if they don't, which is actually very likely that they won't, you just have to buck up and find somebody to cover for you. That's just how life is, kid. There's lots of injustice in the world. You can pretty much write down that you can look for justice or you can look for love, because the odds you're going to have both are very slim. You continue. I know I'm feeling defensive about this because I'm being told to do something that I don't believe is my responsibility, and it is something I do not want to do. I'm having some confusion as to when it's okay to defend in a given situation. So let's keep this real simple. You can always inform people, and you can ask for what you want, but never defend. Ask, inform, and ask. You said, my manager's not listening and not responding to my questions now. I'm feeling frustrated trying to be heard here. Just do what I said, honey. Inform and ask. If you're frustrated, they will feel criticized, just like your husband and others have when you've insisted on being right. And they will make you pay for it. Count on it. You won't even know when it's coming, and they will. You said, I'm afraid they won't hear me and will keep telling me that I have to do something that is not my responsibility. Again, you're right here, but being right does not mean it's wise for you to insist on it. You said, I get really confused with work when it comes to saying, no, I won't do that. You get confused, honey, not so much by the situation, but by your need to be right. You are right, but so what? They're the bosses. Inform and ask, you're done. It's really that simple. Now, what's cool is a couple days after I got this, and I sent her an email response first. Sometimes I do that, sometimes not. I think I did in this case because she needed an answer soon, or she was going to walk into that meeting and shoot herself in the foot or the head. And she called me and said that some other nurse had had something come up where she couldn't take her on call, and she called this woman and said, I have a problem, can I switch call days with you? Her problem was solved 2 days later without her doing anything and without having a meeting where there was a big confrontation. We need to relax. Love works way better than anger or insistence or being right. Here's a member who says, I've discovered how easily I can become confused. This feeling is very familiar to me. It seems to have followed me all my life. Now that my mother has been living with me for the last 6 months, I can clearly see why I lived in confusion most of my life. Just parenthetically to the rest of you, her mother is a whiny, critical, angry, victim-y controller. Lots of fun to be with. Controls everything and everybody, and the writer of this email has always let her. So, my response, you really are confused a lot, and it makes you nuts. We hate being confused. There are a lot of things we can endure or tolerate, but if we don't understand them, our ability to tolerate them goes down by, a lot, exponentially. You said, I had an interaction yesterday with my son-in-law. I went to pick up my youngest daughter from their house, and while I was there, my son-in-law started questioning me about the reasons that we are moving out of state. I found myself explaining to him and giving X number of reasons, which tells you what? That you still don't have enough certainty that you are basically worthwhile. If you did, you wouldn't have a need to explain yourself. It's none of his business. So you don't need to explain. And this is where your confusion comes from. You feel relatively peaceful. Somebody demands an explanation. You think you're just complying willingly. And then you wonder why you feel frustrated, because you're not complying willingly. You feel forced to answer their questions because you still doubt your self-worth. And until you identify that that's the cause, you're going to keep being confused. You said, when I noticed what I was doing, I asked him why he was so invested in the answer. See, you're still looking for approval. You're defending your worth, which is already established, and that's the problem. So he told me that he and my oldest daughter were very concerned about us moving. Well, tough. It's none of their business. You said I was very uncomfortable with the conversation, and yet you kept having it. When people ask me questions that I don't want to answer, I say, don't really want to talk about it. There, I'm done. And then they'll say, why not? I say, what did I just say? I don't even answer that. I say, what did I just say? And then they say, well, you said you didn't want to talk about it. Right, and I really don't. even if you ask me another question, or 10 more. You said he kept insisting I was making a mistake, that I shouldn't be moving my youngest daughter when she's just in the 8th grade, that my husband is selfish, that blah, 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 and that we wouldn't get to spend as much time with their kids. Blah, 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 honey. It's none of their business. Still, you get to move wherever you want to for whatever reasons you want to. If you're going to move to a new state so you can establish a relatively fresh drug trafficking business, that's your business, not his. You said I ended up leaving quickly because I was uncomfortable. Again, because you're not certain of who you are. That is the real reason for your confusion. I got home, I was very confused. Again, so confused I felt emptied out. I was anxious. I'd already processed the move and had chosen to do what contributes to my husband's happiness. But somehow I was so confused after the conversation. You're not seeing the root cause of the pain again. You do not yet feel enough loved and worthwhile. So some people confuse you, frighten you, and then you give in to arguments, demands, your mother's controlling you, all that stuff. The basic reason is there for every event. It's the same basic cause. You have to see it and address it, or you're stuck. I pretty much re-emphasized that. Yeah, good enough. So you got to see the real cause. We tend to see the cause as whatever person's in front of us or whatever situation there is. That's not it. It's a lifetime of not feeling worthwhile. Here's a woman who, member of the site, who told me that three of her friends had made plans to go to the beach together. They knew she would enjoy it, but they didn't include her in the plans. And one of them made a comment. I didn't quite get the context, but it didn't matter. One of them made a comment about her not going. Whether it was to say, yeah, I don't want her to go either, I don't know. But she emailed and said, last night I told the truth to my friend, one of the beach crowd, about how I felt being excluded from the beach time with the friends. I felt heard and seen. I've learned some things about what's going on for her. Even though I was afraid, I could see beyond the fear. I told her that the whole event provoked memories of me competing for limited love with my mom. Actually, the writer's mother had essentially no love at all, so she was competing for nothing. It was impossible. You continue. I told her that I immediately think I'm going to lose her friendship when I'm not included. And then I withdraw, and I've done that all my life. And I assured her that it was all about me. That's really smart. That's important. Bottom line, I expressed myself authentically, and I didn't die in the process. We didn't try to fix the situation between me and the other friend, which is good. Excellent, because fixing is mostly an intellectual affair. I thought about my soon-to-be ex-husband. So many disappointments. Lost our home, couldn't have children, and I made him wrong and made him feel like he owed me something that he wasn't giving me. I seemed to care more about, when I was married, not getting what I wanted than supporting him in his time of challenge. And I hear that you feel bad about that, but you did the best you could at the time. You were in way over your head. You got no love from your mother, negative love, none from your father. You couldn't have cared about him because you were lost yourself. You said our marriage was truly an exchange, and he could not keep up his part of the bargain. He just couldn't give me the things that I was attached to receiving from him, and I can see that now. As for trust, I can see now, based on the gal's definition, that even with a friend from the beach who did make an apology about her comment, I take a very narrow view. I'm ready to be disappointed. Yes, now that's important to see. You just lie in wait to be disappointed. And it's because you have been disappointed so often and badly. And all your feelings and behaviors have their root in that real pain. She went on for a little bit, but the details don't matter all that much. Even though she had an open conversation with her friend, it still didn't satisfy her. What she's missing is the feeling, like I think, second questioner in this particular video chat said. She said, I understand the principles, but I'm not getting the feeling. Same with this woman. So I just loved her. I just sat and worked at my computer for, I don't know, 20 minutes. And even though it was over the phone line, she wouldn't even hear. She just put her head on my shoulder and just sat there. After a while, she said, I feel like I'm leaning in. No kidding. All the next day, she said, I felt like I was in my head maybe 50% of the time, as opposed to all the time. It's the feeling that changes us. It's a feeling of being loved that heals our wounds, not an intellectual understanding. And she's now beginning to get that. Here's somebody who says, I have a question for you. At work, our team leader makes very little eye contact with me. When I go to her office to ask a question, she talks to me while her eyes stay focused on the computer for about 70 to 80% of the time. So what's the meaning of that? She's afraid. We tend to feel somehow disrespected. No, she's just afraid. She isn't even thinking about respecting you. She's protecting herself. She can't look at people for prolonged periods. She's afraid of you and very likely afraid of everything else. You say, I find this very off-putting as I interact with her multiple times a day. When you see her as afraid, instead of personally withdrawing from you, it will feel quite different. See her as a frightened child, and you'll actually be more interested in helping her. It really sometimes helps to see people differently before we can feel and behave differently toward them. I once had a boss who was terrifying. Everybody in the building was afraid of this man. Once I saw him as a 3-year-old in diapers having a tantrum in the hallway. I found it very difficult to take his tantrums personally. So he'd have a little tantrum and I would just say, so tell me in English what it is that you want. The first time I said that, I thought the people around me would have a seizure because he's known for blowing up when he's offended. I said, just tell me simple words, what do you want? And he hardly knew what to say because he was used to getting what he wanted only by intimidating people. And here I was asking him what he wanted. He described to me what he wanted and I said, done, I'll go do that and I'll report back when I'm finished. I don't think he ever yelled at me again. And he became calmer overall. That's what people want. That's what your boss wants. You said, what do you think? Is there something I could say to her about it? It's a good concept, but in practice, not a chance. People like that who are frightened are not amenable to any kind of correction or guidance. If she were open, she wouldn't have her eyes fixed on the computer. So if you go in and say, you know, you're not a very open and communicative person, then she's going to look at the computer 100% of the time after being mad at you. You said she's an overbearing, bossy type who likes to be in control all the time. Just more proof of her fears. People who like to be in control do it only because they're afraid and want to limit their exposure to risk. So that's why she looks at the computer. It's why she controls things. Diminishes her risk of pain. Here's a writer who says, I asked my husband if we could spend more time together, just, doing fun stuff like we used to do. And he was obviously irritated. So this is real short. Look at the difference between these two approaches. First, asking him to spend more time with you on a regular basis. That can only be heard by somebody who's in pain as criticism. Why? Because if you say more time, what does he hear? What he's doing right now is insufficient time. It's less time. It's not good enough time. And so he's going to be busy defending himself, as he already did by being irritated, and he's not going to hear you. Or you could take a second approach, which is to simply ask him each time you want to do something with him. You just make a request. I'd like to go for a walk. Would you go with me? There. That's easy. He can handle that. But And we do it all the time because we're not getting the help we want. We say things like, I would just like you to be more helpful around the house. That's a death sentence. Because then you're telling them they're not helpful now. And B, when do they ever get out from under this axe? They never do. So they've got this axe over their head going, more helpful, more helpful. Where's the finish line to this? And so what do? They respond by not being helpful at all. Why try something where you know you're going to fail? They've done many studies on this subject. If people know they're going to fail at something, they don't try as hard. They fail more. Same with him, where you give him a single task. It has a beginning and end. Would you go for a walk with me? He knows how to begin a walk and end a walk. He can do that. At the end, he goes, victory. He triumphed. He did it. And then you thank him for doing it. He knew that. Here, let's see. This is an email from a woman who says, below is a message I received from our youngest daughter. She's right on the money about everything. How do I reply without sounding like a victim or like I'm being patronizing? I was thinking about saying, honey, you're absolutely right about everything, but after that, I'm not sure. It all sounds like trading or clinging in my head. Now, this is an adult child. The adult child wrote and said, kids, when they get older, love to say this kind of stuff. You're a horrible and selfish person, and you use your past as an excuse to venture for attention. I've lacked a strong female role model all my life because you play a victim. You held me back because of your insecurities and left a lasting effect on both my sister and me. I've had to remind myself every day because of you that I'm worth something, that I'm better than the people who have hurt me. You never pushed me to be great. You never told me I could do anything, never paid attention to me or my sister. Every time I needed you, when it counted, you weren't there. So stop acting like you care. Wake up and realize how selfish you really are. Your daughter has a real problem with not just coming out with it, sugarcoating everything. The people in your life shouldn't have to pay for the evils that someone else did. It's mind over matter. And she addresses her mother by her first name. Kids love that too. Get over it. Push past it and live a better life. She went on and on and on, saying, you've been doing this real love crap and it's not doing you any good. I hope you read this and take it seriously and blah, 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 blah. So you started off by saying that you would say to her, honey, you're absolutely right about everything. That is a good thing to say. But she's not going to believe you. She's going to believe you're saying that just to look good, to look like you're listening. So you need to be specific. You need to say, you're right that I did this, and give her some examples. Now, you can't do this all at once. So when you respond back by email, you might say, you're right about all of it. And I'd be happy to be specific when we get together. What would be a good time for you? Not making excuses, giving her an opportunity. She may just shove it right back in your face and not want to have a meeting. Whatever. You just offer from time to time. When you do get with her, being specific makes all the difference in the world. So when she says, you were never there for me, give her some examples when you weren't there for her. Or even after you give her an example or two, ask her to give you one. And you say, yeah, absolutely. Then you need to give her examples of how you're still doing it, about how you get people's attention by acting like a victim, because you do. And if you can admit how you did it then and how you do it now, she might have a crack of sunlight into her dark soul, and begin to consider the possibility that you might be capable of loving her, which is all she really wants to know. I would suggest you do that with her. I'm not going to do that one. My mother called, here's another member who said, my mother called yesterday to manipulate my husband for money, and I'm upset about it. Oh, the expectations and guilt that come up for us when we interact with family members. If you don't give family members everything they want, then they just don't hesitate to call you a bad person. Because see, if you were a good sister or daughter or whatever, then you would do X. People believe that because we're in a family, because we're in a family with them, we're obligated to fulfill all their needs. And no, we're not. You said, I have this feeling of guilt around my mother, especially when it comes to money and taking care of her. She has suffered a lot in her life with a cheating, unreliable husband, my father, and having to take care of all of us kids on her own. No doubt that she's had a hellish life. And listen to this part, because she's told you all of her life without saying it outright, although she may have. I've had a terrible, terrible life, so you are obligated to take care of me. That's just in her tone. And you're not. Just because she's had a difficult life doesn't obligate you to nothing. Guilt is not a reason to do things for people, especially to love them. You said she believes that it's our job as her children to make it up to her for her hard life. Well, I said she hadn't said it, but apparently she has. And my brothers are irresponsible and live far away, and either they can't or won't help. Crushing guilt, honey. No more guilt. Remember this. Even if you did satisfy her every demand, you would not make her happy. And then you'd be miserable. So who wins? Everybody loses. Long ago, she decided to be miserable. Probably before you were born. Well, certainly before you were born. So what is your responsibility? To love her as well as you can without any guilt or misery. Stop the guilt. You said it started soon after I graduated from professional school. I started paying some bills and bought her plane tickets when she needed them. It's been going on for years. Now I give her a home, food, a car, medical insurance. All along I've been strung along because I felt happy when she would say things like, oh, my friends say I'm so lucky to have a daughter looking after me, or look at my daughter, and she names your profession, my daughter the lawyer or whatever. Or, I don't know what I would do without you. That stuff would make me feel significant, powerful, and righteous, especially as my brothers were all pretty worthless. Made me look pretty good. Honey, you are really buying approval. And she's paying you back periodically, so you keep going back to the store. She's showering you with the rewards of praise. It's a real trade, and you are stuck in the trade, but you're doing it by choice. You say, only it's not working for me anymore. I feel more uncomfortable with the praise as I see it as manipulation, and I get more resentful of the spoken and unspoken demands. And I'm avoiding her and feeling more judgmental, not loving her at all. I'm becoming more aware of how none of my brothers have taken on the responsibility. So see how the trade, even though you fell for it for a long time, because hearing that you're a wonderful daughter is better than nothing, it always wears off. And then not only do you get tired of it, but you become resentful of the people that you once were actually anxious to please. And then it gets really confusing, doesn't it? So you get to decide exactly how much to help her. You decide, not her. And the way you have it set up, you are guaranteed to feel miserable and to have crises. She asks for something, you give it. Then you're stuck with ongoing expenses. Then she needs more. She asks you, you give. She can sense that you're not comfortable. So now she's making requests through your husband. So how can you do this differently? Instead of going through this endless series of painful requests and guilt over and over, make a decision once. Figure an amount of money per month that you can give her lovingly, and she can do whatever she wants to with it. The car, the insurance, the whatever. And if she runs out, what? You say, talk to your sons, to your brothers. You say, part of me is annoyed with her. She demands money, she's never grateful except to brag to her friends. And then she went around me to my husband. So part of me wants to cut her off because of all that. No, you don't have to give her everything. That would be wrong. But cut her off because you're annoyed? Nah, that's responding out of fear and anger. So what can you do? Ignore the manipulations. She is sneaky and manipulative. Ignore that. Just decide an amount per month you're willing to give her, and that's it. Period. Covers everything. No more supplemental insurance, all that stuff. Now I'm questioning why I'd say no, you say. Is it childish reaction to have my chain yanked? Yes, it is a childish reaction. In fact, that's a good word you chose. It takes you right back to being a child. It's understandable. You say, after all, I can afford this. Irrelevant. When I said give as much as you can, I did not mean financially. I meant emotionally, even when it comes to money. See the point? You give as much money as you can freely give from your heart, not from your bank. You said, and I could see it as doing something for her with no expectation of anything in return. Probably a lie, because I'd be buying myself breathing space. Now, this is just my opinion. You are not in a place yet to give very much to her with no expectations, especially not as much as she asks for. Hence my recommendation that you decide how much you can give her freely, ignoring her manipulating and being ungrateful, all that stuff, and just disentangle from her. It's a deceptive, manipulative mess. It's conditional, it's yuck, and you're trapped. The whole reason that you're in this tizzy, it's not about the money. It's because you feel trapped, but you're not. And until you feel free, you'll make the wrong choice. Wonderful questions. If any of you would like to be a live caller, let me know. And we'll talk about doing this next week. I've enjoyed the questions a lot, as usual. And as I've talked about many times, don't get too distracted by the details of the answers. The second questioner put it very well. She understands the answers. She understands the principles. She understands the numbered list of ways to deal with the victim. What most of us don't get is the feeling. So leave here not so much with answers, but with the feeling. We have an opportunity here, even by video, even though we're not in the same room, for you to feel loved, to feel cared about. Keep finding people who can do that. Keep trusting them. And then as you go through the week, remember that love changes everything. We'll see you in a week.